Coach is filmed before a studio audience.
Hey folks, Coach here. As you probably well know, we're in the midst of a global pandemic due to the novel coronavirus. Unfortunately, due to the impact that this disease has had on public activities, there is currently no college football in session. Therefore, I'm currently sitting in my house by myself, mostly staring out the window and watching television. As you can imagine, it's a pretty lonely time. I occasionally call Dober, but, well, he's Dober. And who else am I gonna talk to, the missus? Suffice to say, I've been pretty lonely lately, which is why I'm making this public address to you on this internet forum. See, my radio experience is well behind me, though I wanted to take this time to remind you to check in on your loved ones, especially those who are 60 and old. There's a good chance they might be feeling a little lonely too. In the midst of widespread uncertainty, it can be easy to forget about those old folks who don't really have a lot of folks they can talk to. So take this time to call up your parents, your grandparents, or any loved one and remind them that we are all in this together. Now, if you excuse me, I need to go back to watching these replays. Hey, we all gotta keep ourselves busy. Coach out. Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. I'm John Negroni, the box office columnist for Adam Ticket's head writer, Cinemaholics.com, and I write books whenever I have a spare moment. He's a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend. Some would call him my assistant coach, and he also reviews films for Cinemaholics. It's Will Ashton.
Hey, Coach.
You can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive on Cinemaholics.com. Write into the show anytime by sending us an email. That is cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget, if you'd like to become one of our patrons to support us, donate to the show, patreon.com/cinemaholics is where you can go to learn more about that. And you can always rate and review this podcast fairly easily by going to ratethispodcast.com/cinemaholics. All that stuff is in the show notes for you to check out. Well, we're doing this episode a little bit later. We had some scheduling issues.
Tell me, Coach.
It's unfortunate, but we're going to be able to do quite a few reviews here. We're going to be talking about really some more significant movies than we have in the past few weeks. Past few weeks, we really covered more indie fare, which is always fun. But this week, we have some heavy hitters. What do you think?
I got to tell you, Coach, it's definitely a lot of fun here because, like last couple weeks, maybe last week in particular, we were just kind of picking at whatever we could. Not that they were all bad films, but they were just stuff that we might have overlooked originally or stuff that might not have catched our radar. So this was it was just like a bunch of things at once that were just like, oh yeah, this looks cool. Or, oh yeah, we could talk about this. And it was almost so many things came out this past weekend that we had to push some things back to whenever our next episode's going to be. So
right.
It was definitely a few blessings, and I was happy about that.
Right. Yeah. We didn't have time to see everything, which is kind of a fun problem to have. And so it's
a good problem. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk more about what's coming up next week, including the big one's the Beastie Boys documentary, Beastie Boys story. We're not going to be able to talk about that one until next week because we didn't have a chance to catch it. I did start it, was digging it and everything. But then, once we decided that we were going to wait till next week because we ran out of time, I decided not to watch it too early. So, and hopefully we're going to have some bonus episodes coming up too to fill in the gap. Just trying to schedule those out and make sure they are ready and good to go.
Then we also, weren't we thinking about doing To the Stars? Because you saw that at Sundance, Coach. And then I think when that movie actually came out, which is either this past weekend or I forget, sometime recently, they changed it so it's now in color because originally it was in black and white. So I was curious to see it just for it because there's so much because you praised it so much. I mean, and then I was also curious to get your perspective on the color version to see how it compares to what you saw at Sundance. And
Right.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting conversation. So hopefully we can do that next week as well.
Hopefully, yeah, because I do have to watch the color version now because I have heard some mixed things from people who aren't quite as enamored with the color version. I want to see it for myself.
And I mean, to be fair, like that's from what you were saying, not the way the filmmaker intended the film to be seen. So that's
not her
like another
preference.
factor.
Yeah. At Sundance, she made that pretty clear that the black and white version was what she artistically saw the film really working as. She wasn't trash talking a color version. She sort of was like, yeah, it's out there, but yeah, it just doesn't seem to be her favorite. And we could have a pretty interesting conversation about that next week, talking about the difference between color films and black and white films and how a film can be totally drastically changed by something like that. Just thinking of something like the Mad Max Fury Road movie when that came out.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, It's a Wonderful Life is a good example. And then, Parasite. Parasite has a black and white version that people found very fascinating.
Yeah, I'd be interested to check that out for that conversation because I think that's out now. Like I know it was playing in theaters, but it's probably out on digital or demand that you can see that version.
That would be really cool to see.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
But all right, let's talk about our first movie of the week. This is probably the most talked about film among really passionate film lovers, people who have been really itching to see something of a higher caliber, not to diminish any of the films that have come out in the past few weeks, but this is a bigger one. This is one that feels a little bit more like, I'm actually sort of surprised it is an HBO movie coming out in April instead of a prestige film hitting limited theaters in November, if that makes any sense. To say that there are some great HBO films out there, but yeah, this one is definitely a little bit different than I was expecting. I was expecting like your sort of classic HBO film, something like The Tale, which was a festival movie that ended up doing pretty well, but it kind of came out in the springtime, came and went. This one feels like it could have a little bit of traction, a little bit of buzz for some people who are looking at a complicated Oscars season. We should actually say, we're not really doing an off-topic section this week, but the Oscars, real quick, did decide that they were going to make some updates to some of the restrictions they have on films that are eligible to win an Oscar, right? So, like, for example, a lot of these films that are streaming films now have an opportunity to be eligible for Oscars, even though the previous restrictions were you had to have a certain theatrical run in LA and New York. What do you think about that? Do you think that more films are probably going to open themselves up to Oscar attention, like Netflix and HBO films, for example?
Yeah, I mean, this is what gives Coffee and Kareem and Spencer Confidential its Oscar run.
Yeah. And Timmy Failure.
Yeah, and Timmy. Well, I mean, I'd love for Timmy Failure to get some more consideration, but that's even.
Yeah, I wanted to throw in a good one.
Yeah, even this year it seems unlikely, which is a shame because it's Tom McCarthy's follow up the Spotlight, so it would be fitting in a weird roundabout sort of way. But that one's probably not going to get award consideration one way or the other. But alas, to answer your question, I think definitely this year. I think that's only appropriate because, I mean, given everything that's going on, we don't even know if there's going to be an Oscars next year, a traditional one at least. But I mean, I think there's no really, I mean, unless they only wanted to nominate like Birds of Prey, Invisible Man, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Impractical Jokers, the movie, they had to kind of stretch the window a little bit. And I think it's fair. I mean, I'm excited to see what streaming movies actually do end up, if any, get award consideration. But I think with this one for Bad Education, it was a festival film. Like it was, I think, a TIFF or something. Like it premiered at some big film festival, and I think they were pushing for it to get a like fall awards release that you were talking about.
It was TIFF, to be clear.
Yeah. So I think the initial plan was like push this for last year's Oscars and have like Hugh Jackman go for like a Best Actor run, but then HBO paid something really high, like $12 million or something like that, for the distribution rights. So it kind of inadvertently became like an Emmy film. But now, like we said, with the Oscars kind of being more open, it could roundabout be an Oscar contender. And I'd be excited to see that because, I'm very excited to talk about this film.
Right. I think the award, this probably could have realistically won. I think Hugh Jackman would have suffered just from a really stacked category last fall. But Allison Janney, who is in this film, she probably could have gotten a lot of traction for Best Supporting Actress. Now, the film we're talking about is Bad Education. You might have heard of this. It is the follow-up film from Corey Finley, who wrote and or no, he wrote and directed his previous film. He did not write this film, but you might remember him from Thoroughbreds, which is great film, one of my favorite films from 2018. I vaguely remember you liked that one.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it not as much as you did and some others, but
I was a big fan.
I thought it was I thought it was a really solid debut. I don't know if that was one where like maybe my expectations set me to fail, because it was
great trailer.
Definitely,
such a good trailer.
Yeah, it was a good. It was a good trailer, and it seemed like the type of film that I would normally enjoy, like kind of like a Heathers vibe. But it worked for me. I thought it was good. Maybe if I rewatched it, I'd like it more, but it didn't hit me as hard as it did for you and a few others. So.
I think, well, either way, I know a lot of listeners of the show had a chance to check out Thoroughbreds, and I'd say that it is a good introduction or a good prerequisite to watching Bad Education, because both films tackle a very interesting aspect of human nature or a type of person, which is the sociopath. And both films are thoroughly no pun intended, thoroughly tackling this archetype of a character who is sociopathic. Now, in Thoroughbreds, that was a fictional story, but Bad Education is actually based on a true story. So I sort of alluded to this, but though Corey Finley directed it, it was written by Mike Makowski, and it's based on a New York Magazine article called The Bad Superintendent, which is by Robert Kolker. And I don't know about you, but I went into this film knowing absolutely nothing about this true story. I never heard about it before. And this was my kind of introduction to this story. And I think that's probably the best way to see this, because when you don't know the true story, one of the great pleasures of this movie is slowly finding out what this movie actually is. I'll let you speak to what your experience was, but just to round out the cast here, the film stars Hugh Jackman as the superintendent of a pretty successful public school in Long Island. They are kind of on the rise in terms of their students getting admitted to these Ivy League colleges. And the school sort of treats Hugh Jackman, superintendent Frank Tassone, as a bit of a rock star, because he sort of helped bring this about through his really admirable teaching style, or superintendent style, just the way that he remembers people's names. He's a very slick character, very well dressed, very well spoken. You can sort of just tell that he cares about what he's doing, and it's a very successful career he's sort of carved out over the course of a decade. His main lieutenant in all of this is played by Allison Janney, and her name is Pam Gluckin in the film. And she's sort of his right hand, and we sort of get introduced to them as a little bit of a power couple, not in a romantic way, but just in the way they really run this school. And we get introduced to a few other characters along the way. Ray Romano, who is in this film, Big Bob Spicer, I think his name is. But yeah, he's one of the other administrators. And Rafael Casal is in this, who I wasn't expecting. We also have Alex Wolff as the editor-in-chief of their like little high school newspaper. But then one of the other major characters here is Geraldine Viswanathan. I don't know how to pronounce her name correctly.
Your guess is good as mine.
Now it's Will's turn. But no, yeah, we've seen her pop up in a lot of really fun films like Blockers and Holla, which was a pretty decent film I liked. For the most part. She was fantastic in Holla, but that was a film that I don't know if we talked about it much on this show, but
you referenced it. I didn't get a chance to see it, but I think you weren't allowed to get too into it because it's an Apple film.
Yeah, I kind of avoided my full thoughts on it, you know. But I can safely say everything I've ever seen her in, she has just brought so much charm and charisma to her roles. She plays this like sort of curious junior student who she works for the newspaper, and she's actually encouraged at the very beginning of the film by Frank Tassone to kind of push a little further on this school project, this construction project that the school is financing, that raises some questions. And it raises some questions about some scandals, possible scandals, that might envelop the entire school. And again, I don't want to give too much away here, because I think how the movie unfolds its central intrigue is probably my favorite thing about it. And because it's based on a true story, you do get that stranger than fiction vibe. It's like, how could this be real? It's actually a striking contrast to another film we'll talk about later, True History of the Kelly Gang, which is kind of the polar opposite in its approach. So that'll be a fun conversation. But I have to say, Bad Education really worked for me. I think this is a really fun, engaging, intriguing, compelling film. So I'm a fan, but what about you?
I think this is my film of the year so far, which, I mean, for me doesn't really mean as much because I haven't seen as many films that took me aback. But no, I think this is really solid stuff. Yeah, I will echo what you said in that, like, if you can avoid the story here before you go into it, that's probably best, because I don't think it will take away from your viewing experience. But for me, yeah, all I really knew going in was just like there was like some financial misdeeds done by this educational board. I mean, just as the title suggests.
Yeah, and it's not the biggest reveal by any stretch.
Yeah. No, I mean, but I didn't really know the specifics of it. Like, I didn't know what exactly what happened. Like, what down. I just knew it was like some sort of like embezzlement thing happened. So like that was my only real entranceway. But I was really excited for it just because even though I didn't quite fall in love with Thoroughbreds, I could tell that Corey Finley was a really talented filmmaker. And he was on the verge of, I think his best work's ahead of him. And I could tell that he, even as a very young guy, had a lot of talent and a lot of natural talent for filmmaking. Because I think when he made Thoroughbreds, he hadn't been on a set before. I might be mixing him up with a different guy. Do you remember something about that?
I think you're right about that.
Yeah. So like he's got the gift, I guess. But I mean, he was a playwright, so he knew his way around good storytelling and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, this film's even more accomplished than Thoroughbreds, just in terms of its execution. It's a really tight film, just because like there's like no like ounce of fat in this. It really moves like a bullet, and then like you said, like it kind of unravels as it goes along. Like at certain points, like you think you know where it's gonna go, and you kind of do, but like you don't know to like what extent or like who this main guy is. And,
right, it keeps you guessing all the way.
Right. Like, what's going to happen with, like, the reporter. And I know her mainly from Miracle Workers, which I've talked about on here. And I will echo what you said. I think she's a fantastically charismatic and talented young actress. And I think she does great work here. Although I am looking forward to when she's not playing, like, high schoolers.
Yeah.
Just because I think she's, like, my age, but she's still, like, playing, like, all these high schooler characters. And, I mean, it's not the worst problem to have, I guess. I mean, she looks young. But
she's young. She's 24, 25.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people know this, but she's actually Australian, so which is fun when you see her interviews, and because you don't really see that coming.
Yeah.
You think she's like American because her American accent is pretty good.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, I mean, I think the way her story unfolds is a little formulaic for me. I mean, like maybe they set up a little bit to be too predictable, but everything else I thought was really compellingly kind of subversive in different ways, and it just reminds me a lot. I mean, the main film I think it's going to harken back to is Education. Election.
I was going to say
Election. Election. Sorry, I was mixing up my titles. Election with Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah.
It has like kind of like that, like same kind of like Midwestern high school vibe, like also like a sort of battle between like higher ups and students. So I think that would probably be the easiest comparison, but it also just reminds me a lot of like these sort of like character driven film shot, smaller, like 90s character dramas and I guess early 2000 character dramas, like much is obviously what it's harking back to because of the time period. But it just really worked for me. And I think, like you said, I don't want to give away too much. Like I keep trying to walk around like some of the main plot points, but I think a lot of people who are going to check this out, thanks to HBO, are really going to dig it.
Yeah, I was going to say too, like when we say Election, we should be clear, that it's not like a black comedy like Election. I think it does, like to what you're saying, skew a little bit more toward those like 90s dramas and everything. And I think that's pretty fair. I would say that the casting specifically for Geraldine Viswanathan is pretty spot on because you sort of need a really strong young actress in that role to kind of pump up what would otherwise be, to what you're saying, pretty straightforward, not as complex as some of the other big performances. And there's an interesting dynamic between her and Hugh Jackman that happens later in the film that is probably one of the key scenes. And just in terms of like when you really start to see his real self come out in a certain way. And to dance around certain things, I would also point out with Hugh Jackman enveloping this role, I think one of the main pleasures of this movie is the mystery of this guy and why he is the way he is. And you really don't get this movie's full perspective of who he is until really like the last couple of scenes, which that's the kind of movie that I really like. Movies in this vein that don't just put all the cards on the table halfway, right? To elevate the stakes or to pump up the drama. you're always learning something about this guy. And to what you were saying, like the reason it moves so fast is because every scene you can tell has a very specific purpose, and it's so focused on helping you understand what makes a sociopath, to the point where you really like there's a scene where he's called a sociopath at one point, and I found myself wondering, is he really?
Yeah.
Like I was kind of not getting that from him. And I'm not saying that that is the film's definitive perspective. Some would say it is, but there is a takeaway from this guy that is not that conclusion. That's probably also valid. And so that's what really fascinated me about the whole movie, to be honest. Last thing I'll say too is Mike Mikowski, mentioned him. He also did I Think We're Alone Now with Reed Morano, and also a 2018 film. I don't know if you saw that. I skipped it. That's the one with Peter Dinklage and
Yeah, I didn't see it, but I heard about
Fanning.
it.
Well, I was curious in checking it out because, like, when we were going to watch the rhythm section, because this was the indie film that she had done right before rhythm section, and I was kind of curious to see like how those two films would interact, and then I kind of lost interest because I didn't like rhythm section at all.
Right.
So yeah, I'm a little curious how Mike Mikowski's screenplay in that film, I Think We're Alone Now, kind of translates over to this one, because this is a very fascinating film in the way it's structured. It kind of breaks a few rules, true to the title. So yeah, what else would you say about Hugh Jackman in particular, and Ray Romano?
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to say Ray Romano. I think the only flaw with Ray Romano in this film is that he's not in it enough. I think I've talked about the Romano songs quite a bit on this show. I think primarily when we reviewed Paddleton. I don't know if you ever got around to seeing Paddleton. I think you did. You just didn't.
Yeah, I did.
See
We talked about it. It was one of it was in like my top 20, top 25 of the year.
Yeah, that's a really solid film. Definitely one if you're looking for something kind of small and quaint on Netflix right now. Definitely seek that one out because it's pretty short too. I think that's probably his best performance to date. But he's really, I mean, Big Sick is pretty close to it. Let's see what else there was. The Irishman.
Got some Mooseport erasure happening in this chat.
Yeah, welcome to Mooseport. Yeah, no, I mean, nothing against that film.
Everything against Ice Age, though.
I'll vouch for the first one. I think that's still a good film. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna bring them the whole franchise. The sequels, though, not so much. But yeah, I mean, I think Vinyl. He was like the one good thing in Vinyl. I remember from what little I remember of that show, and I've also heard that he's really great on Parenthood, which is another show I haven't seen. But yeah, I think he's really coming into his own as an actor. I still think people kind of associate him with being like a sitcom star.
They underestimate him.
Yeah, he's like a, definitely. So I'm really looking forward to. I think he needs just like, someone said this on Twitter, like his like own like Uncut Gems, where he's just a total like alpha, like really just like goes at it in a role that like plays to like all of his kind of like understated strengths. I think that's coming because he's making a lot of great friends, and I think he's one of those guys. I think everyone might underestimate him, but everyone likes him. I think. Not to make a pun on Everybody Loves Raymond, but yeah, no, I was really taken by what he did here, even though it was he's only in it for like maybe 20-25 minutes, but he does great work. But yeah, to your earlier point, Hugh Jackman, I think he's another actor a lot of people like, but I think he also kind of gets overlooked in some respects. Like I think people acknowledge that he's a good actor, but like I think people forget like how much like the X-Men movies work because of his performance as Wolverine. I mean, also like even like I didn't really like The Greatest Showman, but I think that also is, you know, a good showcase for him. And then obviously like Les Miserables, same thing. And then there's other films of his I'm blanking on. Even the Front Runner, which I think I liked a little bit more than most. Like I think his performance really helped out with that. But this is a film where I think its greatest strength is what you were kind of alluding to, is that like it kind of weaponizes his charisma, or like just kind of like everyman sort of like charm. He's
so likable. Yeah.
Where it's like it has to communicate a lot in a like really short amount of time, and for you to understand like how he can kind of like be like this like almost unbelievably perfect person from what like it seems like on the onset, and then like as like you kind of unravel him, you realize that like it's all like basically a facade. And I think it's really, really great work from him. I don't know if he'll get any awards consideration for it, but I think he'll definitely be considered.
I could see HBO pushing for it in a campaign.
Yeah, I mean, especially if they're eligible for Oscars.
Maybe a Golden Globe at the very least.
Yeah, definitely I think an Emmy. I just don't know really if it qualifies for the Oscars, but even with the new restrictions, or lack restrictions, I mean. But yeah, no, I think he's great. I mean, I really have only kind of things to say about his performance. So
My guess, honestly, is that HBO is looking at what Amazon and Netflix have been doing and the way they lobby for their films to be Oscar contenders, which is something that HBO has, traditionally not seemed as interested in, weirdly enough. And yeah, this could be one of those films that you could tell maybe that's why they paid so much money for it. But it's interesting to see they paid a lot of money for it just to sort of miss that window. Makes me kind of curious what their thinking and planning is at this point.
Yeah, I think the original play was for Emmys, but
Maybe.
I mean now that because don't they usually like have the Emmys in the summer?
Oh yeah, HBO always cleans up, and in that regard, so this would be the right timing for that. Last thing though, I'll say about performances is the only performance I thought was a little bit underwritten was Allison Janney. I don't know how other people feel about this. I think it has all the appearances of a really competent performance from a supporting actress, which is why I sort of see it as Oscar worthy. But watching the movie, I felt a little underwhelmed by her role in it. I don't think she's in the film nearly as much as I think I was expecting based on the framing of the movie in the very beginning. She disappears quite a bit. And I don't know, there were some scenes where she's clearly doing good work here, but I didn't get the same subtlety and nuance from her that I got from a lot of the rest of the cast, specifically Romano and Jackman. Jackman and Romano specifically get a scene that kind of mirrors the same setting and energy, or like not energy because it's kind of a different type of scene that Jackman and Janney have early on in the film. And it was something that I felt like was a missed opportunity, even though the film really positions her to be the supporting wallop of this film, but I didn't really get that. What did you think?
I guess I was more favorable on it ultimately because I felt like her character was intentionally sort of meant to be a little bit more upfront and a little bit easier to read as a person. So I think it made sense to kind of not really like try to act as though like there was like any like big surprises like they were with Hugh Jackman, where I think like they admit like in the first act it's just like what her crimes or misdeeds are, and I felt like she just kind of is that person. Like she only has like one layer of mistrust.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't know. For me, it made sense from like a story structure standpoint, but I could see like when you hire someone like Allison Janney, who recently I don't know if this was her like first big role after what was it, I, Tonya? But
right, it is.
Yeah, it's basically her biggest since then.
Well, she was in Bombshell, yeah, but I mean, yeah, it's not close to the same.
Yeah, I guess my only real criticism with Allison Janney was like at first I thought like she might have been like overdoing it, like her accent kind of gets a little too broad at times, and like I thought like it was going to be like kind of like that typical like post-award kind of performance where it felt like a little too much, but that kind of dissipated as her story unfolded. So I didn't really have any complaint about that. Although, did you notice that like it sounded like Hugh Jackman's like Australian accent sometimes came out at times, or is that just me?
I didn't catch that.
Okay, maybe that's just me going quarantine crazy, but
crazy.
Yeah, but I thought sometimes like I thought I heard his Australian accent peeking out, but that was my only real complaint, I guess, with his performance. Is I thought sometimes it was coming out, but maybe that's just me going a little nuts. So I don't know.
Yeah, last actor I'll point to, and then we can finish this out. But I do really want to point out one of the surprise performances I really liked from this was Annaleigh Ashford, who she plays Allison Janney's characters. I think she was like her younger sister or something like that, or like
her niece. I think
her niece. Yeah, it was a close family member. She gets some scenes where I was like, really like. I guess that's what sort of confused me, was like some of the emotional weight kind of got transferred over to this. Not unknown actor. We've seen her before. She's probably better known as a singer as well. But she was somebody who I thought popped in this movie, which I definitely wasn't expecting. So overall, this is a really solid movie. Really great performances. Kind of thing that you can watch with like your parents if you're stuck at home. And I recommended this to my mom specifically. She's a teacher and educator, and I told her, I was like, this is the kind of thing where I think you would find it kind of fascinating how this could happen in a public school and how people can get away with it. And ultimately it's about how sometimes we overlook ethically missteps and mistakes that can climb and become bigger and bigger because we like a person. And that's a pretty relevant piece of subject matter. And I thought it was pretty well told here. So I'm a B plus on Bad Education, really high B plus. I think this is a really easy recommend for a lot of people. What about you?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm just almost at an A minus, but I think I'm gonna give it a B plus just because I don't know if it's quite A minus for me based on some of the like kind of minor complaints I had, but it's really close to it. The only other actor I want to celebrate is Jeremy Shamos, who doesn't. He's like I don't know his character name, but he was like
Phil.
the other. Like,
oh yes,
yeah.
He's. I loved Phil.
Yeah, I mean he's like kind of like the kind of pencil neck guy
Yeah.
who like. He only has like 2 or 3 scenes in it, but like he really like just plays the role to the nines. And I thought I thought he was really good. So I wanted to celebrate him as well. But yeah, I mean, everything about it's just a really, really solid, well-wounded movie where it's just like good acting, good writing, good direction. I also really love the attention to detail as far as like the period where it's like not super flashy, but like you can tell like they put a lot of work into like making it look like 2000. Also the fact they shot it on film, which yeah, so like the look of the film also pertaining to the like cinematography and that they shot it on film. I think they really captured that pretty well. Although there's like a couple things like they throw in like a random like stack of VHSs with like episode 1 like prominently displayed where I was like, okay, like I get it's 2002, but like I don't know if like you have to like push it that far. But that's me being, I guess that's just me assuming that people would have a VHS of or was that Phantom Menace, but maybe it's me.
I had a VHS.
maybe I'm just maybe I'm forgetting the past. I don't know, but no, I think it's just really solid, good stuff, and I think it's gonna be, I don't know if it's crowd pleaser is the right word, but like I think it's the type of film that I think a lot of people are gonna see it now and like it just because it's just a really well made, engaging story. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'll give it a high B plus.
All right, double B plus from Will and myself. I think this will be the last film that we see eye to eye on, honestly, for the rest of this, because now we're going to talk about.
I'm surprised we didn't talk about the blind spotting dude.
Rafael Casal. I mentioned him.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out who that guy was.
Well, I didn't want to talk about him too much because I think revealing sort of who he is in the movie.
Well, I'm not saying who he plays, just that he's in the movie. Just that he's in it.
I mentioned it.
Yeah.
There is no Rafael Casal erasure happening in this review.
Sure.
He's in the movie. He's really great. Like he was in Blind Spotting. Such a dynamic performer. Doesn't get enough roles, in my opinion, even though he has been getting some. Not enough. Put him in a superhero flick. Let's do it.
Which superhero?
I don't know.
Okay.
But all right. Let's talk about a Netflix movie. We've gone from HBO to Netflix. And we're going to talk about an animated film called The Willoughbys, which just came out. I think it was the top #1 Netflix thing on their top 10 for a while, if not still.
No, it was Extraction, but
it did hit #1,
top 3
at some point.
Yeah, it was in top 3.
Yeah, so it's been fairly washed, and in fact, I had a family member who watched this before I did, and was like, "Hey, have you seen The Willoughbys yet?" So yeah, this is computer animated, but it looks kind of like a combination of computer animation and stop motion animation. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a stop motion aesthetic sort of thing. Kind of reminds me of like that Peanuts movie and other things that like where they're really trying to up the texture in the movie, kind of like Trolls World Tour, but further in that direction than Trolls World Tour, if that makes sense.
Sorry, yeah, it looks like, remember how they did like Flushed Away, and that was like a CG animated film that like was meant to look like an Aardman animation movie. Yeah, this kind of looks like if Leica tried to make a CG movie, and like they're trying to copy that style in CG. That's kind of what it reminded me of.
I would say Leica is far better at that sort of thing, but I guess we'll get into it. This is from.
I mean, it'll be a sad day when Leica goes from stop motion to CG. To be clear,
right? Although they use CG, but clearly like way less.
Only CG is what I mean.
Yeah. Right. But this is from Braun Animation, and if you haven't heard of Braun Animation, they tend to be behind some what was that one animated film they did? I'm like blanking on it actually. Yeah, because they're Canadian, right? And
I think so. Was it Addams Family?
Was it? No, I don't know if it was Addams Family.
I know it was with MGM, but I think Braun did the animation for it.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder. Maybe they did, and I'm blanking honestly. You've definitely heard of some of the films they've done that have been non-animated, right? Like they've had their hand, like they worked on, like they did some stuff for Joker, they did stuff for Gretel and Hansel, The Way Back. They're all over the place. I think they're doing some animation work for Ghostbusters Afterlife, and I think Addams Family, but yeah, I would have to really double check that because for some reason I'm.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong, but
now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it said Braun Creative is Addams
Well, there's
Family?
Braun Creative and Braun Studios, sort of different.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Braun Creative is it's. I'm not a total expert on how that works. So if you're listening and you have a little bit more insight into Braun Animation and the difference between them and creative, please write in because we're not experts. I never read about Braun, funny enough, but I know they're out there, and happy to see that Netflix is working with them, because when it comes to the animation, the Willoughbys is pretty class. Like it's a pretty bright, colorful, energetic animated movie. Kind of reminded me of that other Netflix animated movie, Klaus, in the way that you feel like you're watching something you've never really seen before, but it still also looks pretty familiar. This was directed by Chris Pern. It was co-directed by Rob Lodermeier. I'm not familiar with either of them, but I have heard of the book this is based on by Lois Lowry.
Well, I think the book is written by the woman who wrote The Giver, right?
I'm not sure. I'm not as familiar with Lois Lowry. But, no, not true. I never read The Giver.
Okay, but
I know
the director,
she wrote Number of the Stars. I read that.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, but the main director, I believe he did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2, or he was one of the directors with that film.
Interesting. Okay.
So I saw that, which I remember thinking wasn't good, but that's all I really remember about it.
Gotcha. I'll have to double check that, but yeah, for the Willoughbys, this movie, like I said, it's based on a book about this kind of eccentric family that there's like this long line of adventure-loving, mustache-filled people who live in this like kind of Addams Family sort of mansion in the middle of New York City. It's kind of away from everything. The house itself is very old-fashioned, and the narrator of the movie is a cat voiced by Ricky Gervais, which personally, no thanks. Not a fan of Ricky Gervais, not at all at this point. And that was something that every single time he came on, it just really grated me. But I know a lot of other people are fans of him, and they won't be bothered whatsoever by him in this film.
I mean, I have kind of more complicated feelings towards Ricky Gervais, I guess, at this point, but I can see why he grates people.
Right. Not everyone, obviously. But we get introduced to this family, and it's made apparent right away that the central couple we're first introduced to, the like Chief Willoughbys, not to get 3 billboards about it, is voiced by Martin Short and Jane Krakowski. There are these parents who are, let's just say it,
Bad.
fully abusive, just physically
Basically.
abusive, emotionally abusive. Absolutely no redemptive qualities whatsoever. Just these really bad parents. They're not framed as like super evil in a very traditional sense, but they are evil. Like it's pretty easy to tell. Like they're bad. You don't like them. And their kids clearly are in a bad situation where their parents mistreat them horribly. The oldest one is named Tim, voiced by Will Forte. The second child down is Jane, voiced by Alessia Cara, who I don't know if I've ever heard her voice work or acting or anything like that, but she's a Canadian singer. Really great music she's put out.
Yeah, this is her first acting performance, if I'm not mistaken.
Interesting. Yeah. And then they have these like twin siblings called the Barnabys.
Yeah.
And they're both voiced by Sean Cullen.
Mm-hmm. He's more of a Canadian comedian. Like I don't think he's famous here, but he's pretty famous.
Yeah. He's been in a few things like Seven Little Monsters and a few other things. Like he's voiced. But also Canadian. It's a very Canadian movie, even though it takes place in New York.
Right.
But yeah, we also have Terry Crews and Maya Rudolph in roles that come on later in the movie. All that said, I gotta say, I didn't like this movie at all. I kind of hated it. And I say that as somebody, I love animation, and I really like the animation in this. And it's not even that I hate the characters. I think the characters at most of the movie are hard to root for. They're what?
No, I thought you were doing some weird wordplay where it's like, I don't think I hate the characters. I think the characters hate me. I thought you were going to do something like that.
That'd be funny, but no, it's not even that. I honestly, I just think that the characters you root for make very terrible decisions, and the people who are mean to them make terrible decisions. It's not till later in the film you sort of get introduced to sort of like the straight characters who are kind of looking at all this and are like, why is this, and it happens kind of late, and it's not bad or anything, that stuff. I think why this film ultimately doesn't work for me is because I think the story is just, I thought, very brainless, and I thought it was all over the place. I think the messaging ranges from incoherent to straight up harmful in the messaging. I think there are some weird takeaways this movie has about child protective services and the way that, like, what kids should do when they're in an abusive situation. I understand this is like based on a book, and I can kind of appreciate the offbeat humor that it employs. Like, it's not that I'm averse to that sort of thing. And it's not that I'm a stickler for like things being politically correct. I think there should always be a balance with those things. And I even like movies that are really dark. Like, I like dark humor, but there were just some things where, like, this movie, it's either not dark enough or it's like sort of dark in a kind of a mean-spirited way that I just didn't appreciate. And I just found myself not invested in this. And I would never want, like, kids that I care about to really watch this. I would maybe be more interested in the book, because I have a feeling that's a little bit more of a comprehensive narrative that's has some of the nuance that I think this thing is searching for. So I say no to the Willoughbys. Nothing against you, Will Ashton.
Yeah. So I'm not gonna lie, Coach. I think these next two reviews are gonna be really interesting. And I'll just go into my thoughts on the Willoughbys. Yeah, I mean, I didn't love this movie, but I definitely liked it considerably more than you did, I'd have to admit. And I don't know if it's just because it's kind of catered more to, like, my sense of humor, or if it's just because it loves mustaches so much. But no, I mean, this is the type of film that I could definitely see if I saw it at the right age. Like, if I saw it like at 12 or something like that, I think I really would have dug it. Or maybe even 10 or 8. Because I think it has like kind of like Roald Dahl aesthetic, where it's like kind of dark, like you said, like it kind of goes vaguely, maybe not even vague, like kind of, it veers into like some pretty unsavory territory, and like is pretty laissez-faire about like death and violence and things like that, in a way that, sure, I can understand, like kind of like the same way like I can understand like why the Addams Family, not the new movie, or just the characters in general are just not for everybody, because it just, it kind of has like a weird kind of morbid sense of humor. But no, I mean, I enjoy this. I definitely agree with you about the animation. I thought that was splendid, and I really liked the design and look of it. It almost made me wish it was just stop motion animated, but I also think this is the type of film that I think only really works in animation, because I think what you're talking about it would stand out to me more, I guess, if it was live action and the lines were kind of more blurred like that. But I think the fact that the tone of the film, well, not really perfect, I think it does kind of prevent me from having any of those thoughts, like where it makes me question like what kids might be taken away from it. And that's certainly valid as far as like, you know, if kids are going to take the wrong message and stuff. I definitely think what it says, like you were saying about Child Protective Services, is kind of gray, to say the least. But yeah, and I mean, I thought at its heart it was a pretty decent, sweet movie. Like I think it does tackle that line where it is kind of bleakly funny in a way that never really brings the movie down. I do think the parents, as far as their place in the story, is enough to where I could see if they were in it maybe more or less, it could be more troublesome. But I think they incorporated them just the way they were needed to be here. I guess I wasn't really thinking about the abusive angle as much, but just the fact they're so exaggerated and over the top as far as like they're kind of just general whatever aesthetic they're going for. I guess I just wasn't really thinking about it in that particular respect. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a pretty funny, enjoyable movie. I definitely think kids will probably get a lot out of it. And I mean, as just like a fun Netflix movie, I guess that's where I saw it more than anything else, is just like a fun little throwaway animated film. Like I said, I haven't seen Claws, so I can't compare it to that one. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I just got more out of this one than you did, but I can see where you're coming from.
To me, it's junk food more than anything. But and like it has like some really like gross ingredients that I think are harmful for children. If I have to,
guess.
we talked about this.
I mean, candy plays prominently in the film, so I guess.
But I
where
guess
you're coming from.
I guess it's the type of junk food that isn't junk food. I personally find tasty. So like that's on top of the lack of nutritional value, right? It's sort of like if I was eating, like if somebody gave me like a plate of just like these like mayonnaise flavored Cheetos, I'd be like, not only is this junk food, it's gross. Like that's my experience with it. And I guess it's the type of junk food that other people might appreciate a little bit more and just be able to overlook the unhealthy ingredients, in a way that I would with a different movie. So yeah, not to dismiss or diminish anybody else's taste for sure. I guess my problem is I didn't find it funny. I didn't laugh at all. Like I just the energy of this film it's not my wavelength, I guess. And we talked about this off the air, and I think this movie actually helped me understand a little bit better why almost all of the Illumination films don't work for me, with the exception of like The Grinch and the first Despicable Me. And even then, I don't think either of those movies is particularly strong. I just found them way more watchable. But yeah, when I watch like a Minions movie or The Secret Life of Pets or any of that stuff, those movies operate by like, they're just a lot and they throw so much and they're so fast. And that type of humor is just like boom, 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 just going to hit you over and over and over. But to me, it's like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon without like the wit. And so that's what like really bums me out about movies like this, and why I tend to have a more strong reaction to it than otherwise. I'd probably be like, this is fine. It's not the worst thing you're going to see by any stretch. And like, they're even, again, it's hard for me to be too mean to this because I really appreciate the animation here. But no, it didn't charm me whatsoever. And, and that's even with what I would consider really strong voice acting. It's so weird, my push and pull with this. I thought the voice acting was actually pretty great. But yeah, other than that.
Yeah, I mean, well, talking about the voice acting, the only performance that struck me as a bit off was Will Forte. And I love Will Forte. But like, I don't know, just that weird thing where it's like, this is clearly an adult man voicing a child.
I thought that worked personally, because I thought he captured the line between a prepubescent and a pubescent kid actually pretty spot on. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
I mean, it's a fine. I mean, I think it's a good performance. I just didn't think it was a little jarring. I guess it took me out of the film a little bit, because every time he spoke, I'm just like, well, this is clearly Will Forte voicing a child character. I wasn't really able to fully get immersed into Tim Willoughby's character for that reason. But it wasn't bad performance, wasn't a bad choice. I just thought I get what you're saying. For me, I found it a little weird. But as far as the Illumination comparison, I get where you're coming from. I guess I have mixed feelings about Illumination, so I kind of give and pull where I stand on them. But I didn't really think about Illumination during this. I thought more of like the like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, like a lesser version. Like I guess that makes sense. It was based on the director of the sequel, where it's like it's not quite as consistent or as consistently funny as that film, but like that also has a very kind of like zany, like anything can happen sense of humor, where I guess I find that appealing in short spurts, which is like this film, which is like a 90-minute animated film. Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna compare it to Looney Tunes, yeah, it's not gonna match, but few things are. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a comfortably like B- animated film for me, where I get where you're coming from. Like, I don't think this is top tier animation. I think it's like, I guess if we're gonna use a food analogy, it's like day old cake, where it's like, yeah, it's a little stale. It's not pristine, but it still tastes pretty good to me. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was fine.
Yeah, I guess probably my main criticism outside of some of those more personal nitpicks is probably that I think maybe this would have worked as a story more episodically, because I think that the movie kind of bounces back and forth between like what feel like episodes where there's like a baby introduced and a candy general, and things just sort of show up and disappear, and you never really quite understand where any of those story threads are going. And the episodic nature of it kind of made me think, this feels like something that was conceived as a show maybe, and then kind of tossed aside for just that film treatment. I'm not sure. But yeah, either way, I know you were right, by the way. I looked it up. Chris Pern did do Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs too, which I didn't see that one. I liked the first Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. I thought that was really strong. But yeah, for Willoughbys, I'm not a fan. I give this one a C, very close to a C minus. Really didn't care for it, but what would be more of like a D plus kind of film for me, I feel like obligated to amp up to C because of some of the positive things I did mention, and I don't want to trash a film that clearly has a lot of effort put into it by a lot of the people, and it's pretty visible on screen. So that's the Willoughbys. C for me, B minus from Will Ashton. It's on Netflix right now. And there's certainly worse things you could watch on Netflix. I would say like Spencer Confidential's way worse than this. Love, Writing, Repeat. That stuff, I would watch the Willoughbys 3 times if it meant I didn't have to watch those films again.
Yeah.
Although I've seen some people sort of come out of nowhere and be like, hey, Spencer Confidential was good, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I've seen some of the murmurs, and who knows?
Okay.
Who knows why people do things.
That's quarantine brain talking, I think. I guess that's yeah. I don't know. I guess I liked Spencer Quarantine more than you and Sam did, which
Spencer
like
Quarantine.
is Spencer Quarantine. Yeah, I mean, like is kind of a strong word to use there, but I mean, even then, like I think it's a pretty bad film. So, but I don't know. Each their own, I guess.
All right, let's get into our next film, True History of the Kelly Gang, and I think this is going to be another contentious one, which is fun. This
not contentious.
Who knows? Anything could happen. This is from the latest from IFC Films. This is also the latest film from Justin Kurzel, who he did Macbeth back in 2015, starring Michael Fassbender and Marion Cotillard, and that film got a lot of acclaim. It won was nominated for the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and it was kind of in the Oscars conversation. Didn't really have a lot of traction, but it was definitely a film that put Kurzel on a lot of radar, specifically to direct the Assassin's Creed movie that had long been in development. A lot of people have been wanting to make an Assassin's Creed movie, and he was tapped to do it. He brought Michael Fassbender and Marion Cotillard straight from Macbeth into that film. It came out just a year later, around the same time as Macbeth did, and yeah, it just didn't quite work. It was a bit of a misstep, infamously, for Kurzel. So we haven't seen a film from him in 4 years now. And here he is doing an adaptation of a novel based on Ned Kelly, a novel by Peter Carey, which is also called True History of the Kelly Gang. And a lot of you might not know who Ned Kelly is unless you live in Australia or New Zealand. We have a lot of Australian listeners.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Who are very familiar with Ned Kelly. So I apologize ahead of time for some of the things we might get wrong about some of the Ned Kelly lore and the things around the real life man, because we're just in the States. We're not as well versed whatsoever on Ned Kelly. Like, I had barely heard of him up until film school. One of the reasons we learned about him in film school, though, is because the world's first feature length film was the story of, I think it's called The Story of Ned Kelly, or The Story of the Kelly Gang, something like that. I have so much Ned Kelly stuff stuck in my head, I can't quite recall. But yeah, The Story of the Kelly Gang, that's what it is. That film was a silent film that came out in 1906, and it was groundbreaking because it was the first time we saw something really feature length. It was over an hour long, which in 1906, I mean, that was certainly a bit aggressive, a bit different. And that movie came out just, less than 30 years after the infamous shootout that happens between Ned Kelly and the police force, because I believe that was in 1880s. So kind of fascinating to look at those films side by side. I don't know, what's your familiarity going into this movie with Ned Kelly, Will?
I'm familiar with the name, but not as much the story. I mean, in addition to that film, there's
two more.
I guess the notably less infamous 2003 film with Orlando Bloom and Heath Ledger.
I've seen that one. I haven't seen the Mick Jagger one, so I don't know what people think of that.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar. Yeah, I think this is the first actual Ned Kelly film I've seen, but I'm more familiar with the kind of story itself, like the myth, I guess, of it, which is kind of appropriate for, I guess, this film because it's like exploring the myth, but I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Well, for anybody who does know a lot about Ned Kelly, I think the first word of warning I would say to those people is this is a completely revisionist take on his life. And it actually kicks off that way. It tells you from the outset, hey, everything you're about to watch is a lie. Like, those are the first words you see. And you really get that early on, because if you know the real history, the true life of Ned Kelly, it's very different from the way it's depicted in the movie to the point where I'm surprised whenever I saw things that were sort of based on real life, I was surprised. I was like, oh, I thought we were just making stuff up completely, right? Which I have to say is one of the main things I actually appreciated about this, but we'll get into it. This premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival just this past September. So another TIFF film. It stars George McKay as the adult Ned Kelly. He doesn't pop up until later in the film. We sort of meet him played by Orlando Schwartz for the majority of the first and part of the second act, I would say. I guess just the first act, actually. His mother is played by Essie Davis throughout the whole film. And there are a lot of men, a lot of evil, kind of difficult men who kind of come in and out of his life. First, there's Charlie Hunnam, who is a sergeant who is serviced by his mother, who's a sex worker in this. We also meet this film's version of Harry Power, played by Russell Crowe, who's not in this film a whole lot, but he definitely makes an impression. And then later on, Nicholas Hoult, who plays Constable Fitzpatrick, who is probably one of the other more infamous characters. He's kind of like, if you watched The Kid, he's I forget the name of Billy the Kid's nemesis, the law enforcement nemesis played by Ethan Hawke, his name. But it's that kind of thing. And then we also have Thomasin McKenzie in this, Sean Keenan, who I was surprised to see, but yeah, he gets a pretty significant role in this as well. So that's kind of the layout of this film. We follow the life of Ned Kelly, and like I said, it's sort of a rewriting of history. A lot of changes have been made in it. A lot of it comes from Peter Carey's novel. And one of the first things you'll notice is I was like, oh man, at times I was wondering if this was a Guy Ritchie kind of film because of the soundtrack and the way it employs like a punk rock aesthetic in terms of the soundtrack and the brutality. And a lot of this film's kind of hard rock sensibility in the production design, especially in the third act. And one of the other striking things about this is like usually when you see a movie or see anything about Ned Kelly, you don't get a lot of his life as a kid, and you don't get a lot of his life before he becomes the infamous outlaw that history remembers him for, because so many of the interesting things that he did as he was a bit of a Robin Hood of Australia, and that's really where a lot of his legend comes from. Usually that is the main event. Like that's what people go to a Ned Kelly movie to see, is that struggle between a guy rebelling against authority, right? It's sort of like a Free State of Jones spent most of the time with that guy as like a 10-year-old. And that is one of the striking things about it. And, but there have been so many Ned Kelly adaptations. I ended up appreciating that. But let's talk about the film. Will Ashton, what do you think? A true history of the Kelly gang?
I thought overall it was pretty good. I thought the performances were probably what shined the most. I think Essie Davis, who I think people probably know best from The Babadook, is fantastic in this as she was in The Babadook. I honestly think she should have been nominated for an Oscar for The Babadook, if not won. So the fact that she didn't get either was, to me, a great tragedy. But she's really good in this. What's his name? George McKay? Is that who plays Ned Kelly?
Yeah, George McKay. But I do want to say, if you haven't seen The Babadook, I think her other more recognizable role is she had a role as a character named Lady Crane in Game of Thrones. One of Game of Thrones' better seasons, the 6th season. You might remember her kind of interacting with Arya for a couple of episodes. She was phenomenal in that role. And I'm agreed. Like every time I see her in anything, I'm just like, what a fantastic actress who isn't in that much stuff, like in terms of she's been in a lot of things, but not in a lot of like really big projects. She also was in Assassin's Creed, I think, but I didn't see that one.
Oh yeah, she was in Assassin's Creed. Yeah, I think she was in the beginning. Or like she had a kind of minor role in it. But yeah, I think to be fair, this is another thing where I think she might be more well known in Australia than she is here.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know that for sure, but that would be my guess. But anyway, I think she's fantastic in this, but I always think she's great. George McKay, who probably I think you said this already, but people probably know him best from 1917.
Oh, I hadn't mentioned that quite yet, but yes.
He's really good in this. Russell Crowe is fantastic. And I'm loving this like kind of late stage Russell Crowe recently, like this and Noah and Nice Guys, where he's like, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, but like, like he's a little more portly, like he's a little bit more like hairy. He's more persnickety, but he gets fun dialogue. He gets to be a bit of a jerk, which is fun. Yeah, it's like he's kind of like fully embracing, like he's not really like going for like the star looks and like kind of like being like kind of like old
Yeah.
Mel Gibson type, but he's like kind of just yeah.
He would fit in really well in like The Hateful Eight, like as a character in that movie.
Oh yeah.
I didn't really say this is a Western. Like this is an Australian Western through and through. And real quick, I say about George McKay, if you didn't see him in 1917, he was also in Ophelia and Captain Fantastic are another
and,
couple of his roles.
11/22/63 as well.
I haven't seen that show, but it also Where Hands Touch. People might have seen him there too. He's been like on a bit of a transcend. And then we also brought up Thomasin McKenzie, who was in Leave No Trace, which got some attention, but then Jojo Rabbit, which you kind of have a uniting of these two Oscar contenders. So it's even interesting to see that like, because this came out at TIFF, this could have been like an Oscars movie, right? If things had been different.
I guess.
And, I guess George McKay and Thomasin McKenzie would have been in like a couple of different things throughout Oscar season.
Yeah. But I mean, I think performances are really good. I like the cinematography. I think that's probably more where the punk aesthetic kind of comes in, because it's not really shot like a conventional film. It has kind of like more of like an intentionally kind of gritty, grimy look to it that I found very appealing. I think it might turn some people off, but that was one thing I think that really brought me in. There's also like some very like graceful, like I don't know if they're like helicopter or like how they got those like sweeping kind of like horse shots, and like just like very like static silhouettes of like trees and things like that, where like kind of the more Malick influence comes in.
A lot of Roger Deakins influence, but we should say the cinematographer is Ari Wegner. You might.
Yeah, I was gonna say more Emmanuel Lubezki, but I guess
Lubezki is definitely a good comparison. Yeah, but Wegner, she has a style all her own. I mean, in Fabric, Lady Macbeth, you really get the feeling like that she had some creative input in this movie for reasons that, well, we might get into in terms of the revisionist stuff.
And I forget, it's the director's brother, but he did the score.
Yeah, Jed Kurzo.
That you kind of mentioned. Yeah, and I thought that was really strong. But I don't know. It to me, I guess what took me out of it was the type of film that, like you said, it wants to be punk rock, but it feels very conventional to me. Like in a way that, like, yeah, that's where I knew you were gonna get mad.
I'm sorry. I don't want. I just don't want somebody who watches this movie and be like, "Well, Will said it was conventional."
Okay, well, not like. What I mean by that is that, like, if I don't know what people would define as like a conventional film, but like I'm saying, from like the aesthetic stuff, it's going for a punk aesthetic, but like the storytelling here, even though it's a little shaggier and like it's more willing to kind of break the like 3-act structure a little bit, I felt like the story was ultimately just more prone to convention than the film wanted to be. And I'm assuming you disagree because of how you feel about the film.
Yes.
But I don't know. I guess to me, like it just felt like the type of film that was like at odds with itself, where it like wanted to be something kind of bold and different, but it never really trusted itself to do that enough to where like I think it made much of an impact for me. But I think if we're just talking about like the aesthetics, like the cinematography and the performances, and then just the general look of the film, I think that stuff is really solid. So I think it's a well put together movie, just from like the like visual stuff. Like everything you can see on screen looks good. I just don't think that the story really came together in a way that hit home for me too much. But I get what you're saying though. Like I think the intent here is to like make a man of the myth. Like we're looking at like the stuff that you would expect from a Ned Kelly film is really just kind of like brushed over for the most part.
It's
like,
downplayed.
We don't really see. Yeah, downplay is probably a better word. Like it's not really looking much at like the crimes or like the murders or anything. Like they're there, obviously. Like they're not going to take them out, but like the reason like this childhood is explored so much, the reason why we see kind of more like quieter, kind of more traditionally Western moments is because, yeah, like we want to see who this guy is as a person. Like we're not looking at like what he did or what his legacy was, but we're just kind of studying who the man became. But I guess again, all those elements just felt very conventional to me. And I understand you disagree and we'll disagree on that, and that's fine. But I guess that's where it takes me from being like an excellent film to like just being pretty good.
Interesting. Yeah, to sort of piggyback off of that, I think what I took out of it, and it did hit home for me 100%. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I really think it's terrific. And it scratched an itch. It really did, because I have been wanting a Western like this ever since like True Grit. I just feel like we've really been missing a Western that really pushes the envelope on what a Western can be. And that's what I want to piggyback off of. So it was what you mentioned. It demystifies the romanticism of his criminal exploits, of what Ned Kelly did. And it does it without making him a villain. It positions him as a victim of society, which to me feels truer to the soul of the Ned Kelly story. That's getting more into where I think some people in Australia specifically might disagree with me. And I think that's perfectly valid. And I would definitely be cautious of what I say just because I don't have as strong of a connection to Ned Kelly as a household name as they might. But my understanding of this man and how his story has been passed down is that you almost sort of have to rewrite his story to get to the truth behind what happened. Because his story is an oral history that has been passed over so many times and it's been romanticized so often and so in such a glossy way that you end up with the historical record positioning him as a bit of a Robin Hood. And even though it might be truer in the details, it doesn't ring as true. So what this film decides to do is it decides to take away all of the things that made Ned Kelly this sort of Jesus figure. And to what you're saying, it makes him more of a man, down to how this film sets him up as sort of a biblical character. His closest friend is clearly positioned as Jesus. His love interest is Mary, who has a child. You have Nicholas Hoult as a total Lucifer. Like, the film makes no bones about how it wants you to view him as not Jesus, not someone who is larger than life, but someone who kind of fell into this life by accident, by circumstance, being pushed into it. All of that is true. And I think that's what the novel is getting at. And what I like about Kurtzel's direction here is that he just blasts it with style. Like, this film just smothers the screen with style that keeps you engaged in the way that the best Westerns do. So that's why it hit home for me, is because this actually is telling a different kind of story. It's not about bad boys being redeemed. It's not about outlaws who are just bad to the bone, getting a chance to save a bunch of people. It's about a guy who goes nuts. And it's about the tragedy and brokenness about that situation and how it pulls him into a frenzy and then shows you the consequences. And that's why it landed for me so thoroughly. Like, I honestly could not take my eyes off the screen. And I have to say, of all the movies we've watched since we've been forced into quarantine, this is the movie I most feel like I have to see this on a big screen. Like, some of the other films we've talked about, as much as I've liked them a lot, I could totally be fine with not seeing them on a big screen. But the second I have an opportunity to see this on any screen, I'm there. It's not even that long. Like, I don't think it's the biggest commitment. It's just over 2 hours. And I'm not saying it's the most accessible movie we're talking about, clearly it's not. Some of the ways this film just goes bonkers toward the end, that's when it hooked me, honestly, is how it doesn't pull back from the violence, how it continuously builds upon its own creativity in the violence and what these people are doing. And I understand it's going to rub people the wrong way. And I think some people are going to look at it and be like, that's not part of the story. Like, why are they wearing dresses? Like, what's the point of that? I think this is a film that deserves to be analyzed in those terms. Why they decided to do that, where that stuff comes from, why Ari Wegner shot it the way she did. To me, this feels like a film by a dream team, where, to what you were saying, I think from Justin Kurtzel's direction, where he shines is with performances. I think Ari Wegner is coming into becoming one of our best cinematographers. I think Jed Kurtzel, to what you were saying, has such a great ear for soundtrack and how to put that punk rock music in. The way punk rock music is used in this movie is fascinating to me, because usually, like with a Guy Ritchie movie, for example, whenever you have that sort of like bombastic rock, it's usually sort of to try to make you feel good about action and to get a visceral thrill out of it. Here, it's more to sort of tap you into this frustration of these characters and the hopelessness and the desperation and the doom and the inevitability of how everything's going to fall apart. And I guess I just can't stress enough how different that is from the real story of Ned Kelly, which is just, it's framed, that to me is conventional, of like guy against the odds. That's Free State of Jones. That's Robin Hood with Russell Crowe. Like that's why I sort of like, couldn't contain myself when you said the story was conventional, because I just had a totally different experience where I felt like they were actually doing a lot to avoid that trap. And that's the source of where I really appreciate it. And I will fully admit, rough around the edges, very shaggy movie, very, very imperfect as all movies are. But no, I came away from it loving every frame and loving it for some of its imperfect charm. So I'm all in on this movie. So it's definitely one of my films of the year.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're going to compare it to Free State of Jones and Ridley Scott's Robin Hood, I do think it goes above those films. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, this isn't Marie Antoinette for me, I guess. That was a film I think that took a historical figure and kind of put a punk rock element to it. And I think that really worked for me in that film. And I think it'll work for some people too. Like I don't think you're going to be alone in this, because I have read some reviews that really people were really taken by this film, including a friend of the podcast, Emily. I believe she really liked the film as well. I mean, just going off Letterboxd. You two really liked it. So, I mean, I like the film. Like, I think it's good overall. I enjoyed it. I guess I just didn't quite match your feelings toward it. And I guess for me, ultimately, it had the punk rock elements in it, but I just didn't feel like it had as much of a deep emotional experience with it. I felt like it kind of hit a lot of expected beats, and I felt like for as much as it tried to push against them, it still kind of fell for those in the end. But again, I guess my biggest takeaway is that I just really wish people liked Terrence Malick's movies more, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but I felt like that's a guy. Yeah, that's a guy I feel like that does stuff like this in a way that feels a lot more organic and meaningful to me. And I guess to me, it just felt like kind of an imitation of that at times in a way that made it a little bit more hollow. But I mean, teach their own. I enjoyed it. I'd give it probably a high B-. I was between a B- and a B. I think I'll give it a high B-. I might go back to a B, but I don't know. I'm somewhere between those two. But I like the film. I think a lot of people are going to dig it as well. I think it's worth seeing, especially now if you can get it. I think you saw it on Amazon as well.
Yes, Amazon.
So yeah, it's pretty accessible.
Yeah, to rent, to be clear.
Yeah, sorry, not on Prime. Yeah, just to rent. It's a solid, fun film. Even if you don't know the Ned Kelly story, maybe even be better if you don't know much about Ned Kelly's story.
Maybe.
It's fun. It's enjoyable. I just didn't get as much out of it, I guess, in the end.
Yeah. I am very, very, very high A-. Easily one of my best films of the year. And I would say that I will be shocked if it's not in my top 10. And I really do think it is one of our better Westerns, one of the best Westerns to come out in the last decade.
Did you see The Rover?
The Rover? No.
Okay, that's another Australian Western. I think you should check that one out. That's really good.
I do really dig Australian Westerns because, the Westerns, like the American ones, they have so much going on in terms, of like Americana and a lot of like the racial strife with the Native Americans, Mexican culture and all of that. And there's a lot of American Westerns I think are just absolutely amazing, obviously. But Australian Westerns are so fascinating to me as well. Like there are some films that aren't traditional Westerns like The Nightingale, which dive into a lot of the tension between the Irish people and the native people, the indigenous people of Australia, which this movie doesn't really get into. This movie really focuses more on the Irish. Yeah. Mad Max for sure, of like a post-apocalyptic Western. For those of you listening who love some Australian Westerns, and maybe you don't even know that you already do, I think this is one we're seeking out. I think that, like you said, like it's not for everyone, but I think the people who do discover it, you might really love it. So that's why I think it's worth trying. And I hope that you get the same thing out of it that I do. Just don't be surprised. It's like you just may not click with it in the way I did. I think you could say the same for some of the other movies that you really love, that you love them for what they do for you, not necessarily how you think other people will take them.
Yeah, sure. Though I will say, everything that Russell Crowe's like look and what he's doing in this is 100% my bag. That is, I think I'm like 80% there as far as my quarantine look, and I think I'm going to be there 100% by the end of this thing. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, your beer needs a little bit more salt with its pepper.
Yeah, let's get in there. If it goes on long enough, we'll get there.
All right, that is True History of the Kelly Gang. Strong recommendation for me for an A-. Will's not quite as on it with his B-, but hey, you might be somewhere in between, and that it would be very good news indeed. And I forgot to say, I also have a review of True History of the Kelly Gang if you want even more of my thoughts on it. And I published a review on the Young Folks. So if you want to get an even more complete picture of my takeaway and why I really liked it, you can find it right now on theyoungfolks.com. Okay. Let's talk about a TV series, actually.
Sure.
We haven't done that. Or actually, no, we're going to talk about one more movie, then we're going to talk about a TV series. How about that?
Okay. Sure.
Let's just do all the movies, and then we'll finish out the show with a little bit of TV. Kind of more of a limited series, but...
I'll be quick on this one, but you're talking about Extraction,
Sounds
right?
good. Sounds good. Extraction, which I have not seen. This is the only movie we're talking about I haven't seen. I do know this is the feature debut of Sam Hargrave. This is now, as we mentioned before, #1 on Netflix. And I had a chance to see this. I decided not to. I might get to it eventually, but I don't know. Will Ashton, what's this movie? What's it about?
Well, to that I say don't. But this is the Joe Russo produced and written action film.
And I think Joe and Anthony Russo helped with the story. The story is from them and Andy Parks, I want to say.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not as familiar with the graphic novel that it's based on.
See You Died. Yeah.
Yeah. But the broad strokes is that this is basically an action vehicle for Chris Hemsworth. I don't know where that came from.
Same guy. Same vibe.
Yeah. Nothing against Chris Hemsworth. I think he's a lovely.
I was about
man.
to say it's like definitely something against Chris Hardwick, but anyway, that's different.
I don't know. Anyway, this is a like kind of a throwback sort of action film, like kind of thing you'd see like in like post 9/11, mid 2000s sort of. Like we got Chris Hemsworth playing a character named Tyler Rake, who is
very
like
believable
this, like,
name.
Yeah. This Australian mercenary, we're going back to Australia, who is a soldier, and he's recruited when there is another mercenary who's involved to rescue India's largest drug lord's son, who is held for ransom by another drug lord, and just basically becomes this whole kerfuffle where it's just an excuse basically for Chris Hemsworth and these other guys to basically get into a bunch of shootouts. This is not the type of film where I think you really need to get bogged down in the plot, because it's really just a means to an end as far as the action, which as far as the action is concerned, I think it's performed well from like a choreography standpoint. But it's clear that Sam Hargrave, he's not as experienced as a filmmaker in this regard, because the camera work, I guess, leaves a little bit to be desired. And there's also a lot of like digital cinematography to this, where, nothing against digital cinematography, but like when a lot of like the like kind of like post digital effects are evident in a film that's like meant to be a lot more grounded and realistic, it becomes very jarring and apparent to me, including a sequence I think otherwise is really impressive, which is like this like 12-minute single take thing, which I don't think it's actually a single take, but they like stitch it together as such, that I think is like supposed to be the centerpiece of the film. And it's well done, but it also just kind of reminded me of a thing I've noticed recently where, we get films now like 1917 and a film I really enjoyed, Long Day's Journey into Night, where because of digital technology, we're able to see more of this like long take style in a way that was, it was done before with various films on film, but now that we have digital, it's a lot easier. Not that it's easy, but easier than it was before. And, I think a lot of films use that to effective means. Like I think Birdman is a film that does it really well, even though I have some problems with 1917. I do think it does it well. This film, it just kind of felt like showboating to me. In a way that reminds me of just like other TV shows and other forms of media recently, where it's like, is this really effective as far as pushing the story or like getting us in the mindset of the characters? or is this just as a means to show you what you can do as far as your filmmaking? And for me, it just felt like the latter. Like, it's impressive, but it just kind of left me feeling empty inside. And I guess that just extends to my feelings towards the film itself, which everything about this felt fairly unpleasant. Like, I didn't really enjoy the characters because we really didn't get to know them. Like, Chris Hemsworth's character is just basically the stoic mercenary type who like has a vague backstory with like a beach with his son that almost verges on the parody, just because it's just there to like make him seem realistic, but they don't dive into it at all. And, you know, I mean, other movies do that fine. Like, I mean, like something like John Wick, like they don't fully dive into his backstory, but I think there's enough there that we get the heart and the emotion of it. And this, I don't know if it's just Chris Hemsworth or if it's just the storytelling, but it just felt like he was not a person. He just felt like a killing machine throughout the whole thing. And he's such like a stoic, like emotionless guy that like this intended father-son dynamic with this kid also doesn't really work for me, just because I didn't feel the heart or emotion of it. And ultimately, I just felt like this was a big waste of my time.
Can I say that, so in terms of Chris Hemsworth, I'm just thinking like, it almost seems like we already went through this roller coaster with Chris Hemsworth where he comes out with Thor, huge success with Avengers, and then we start seeing him in like Black Hat and In the Heart of the Sea, and he's like just really nothing kind of movies. Not that they're nothing, but just they're just not all that impressive. And they sort of have him as like the stoic, anti-charisma kind of character, this like throwback action hero. That stuff didn't work. It almost felt like that was it for Chris Hemsworth. But then we get Thor Ragnarok and Endgame, and boom, he's back, and he's like again with the Marvel stuff. So this almost feels like we're returning to that, and they're hedging their bets with the Russo brothers because they've had so much success with, you know, directing this guy. So I guess I could sort of see people scratching their heads a little bit with this movie, being like, what's the problem? Like, why is Thor like the only role that seems to make him really work, or like to make him really pop on screen?
I mean, I think it's just, like you said, I think it's people misjudging what Chris Hemsworth does, which is that, like, even beyond the films you mentioned, like Cabin in the Woods also, and like, I know a lot of people don't really like this. Yeah, I know a lot of people don't really like it, but Ghostbusters, say what you will about that film and whatever, but I think those films, that and Cabin in the Woods, and also, like you said, the Thor movies and Endgame, they understand that, like, yeah, he's like, he can be a big stoic action hero, but what makes him appealing is when he's like plays against that, and he's like kind of goofy and silly, and it goes against what you expect from him. And I think that's the root of what people like about Chris Hemsworth. And I think that's why movies like Black Hat and The Heart of the Sea don't do well, and they weren't well received, because it's like, yeah, I mean, you know, you can give him a role like that, and, you know, he'll do it.
And you have great directors like Ron Howard and Michael Mann.
Right. But it's just like, it's clearly not playing to his strength. Like, I think he can be very charismatic, but I don't think he's naturally charismatic in that way. Where, like, I don't know, like, maybe somebody like, I'm trying to think of an actor who can do that kind of stoic thing. I guess, like, maybe like Tom Cruise. What was that?
DiCaprio.
Sort of. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking more like Tom Cruise, where it's like, he can play goofy, but he can also play like kind of serious and like, you know, like a very intense guy. But like, there's something about, you know, for all of his faults as a person, Tom Cruise, I think, can carry like a film like this a lot better on his natural charisma, where it's like, Chris Hemsworth, I think his charisma kind of comes a little bit more effortlessly, but he does have it when he's playing somebody who's a little goofier and a little bit more lighthearted. And I just think this goes back, it retrogrades against what I think makes him a fun performer. So in that sense, it's a throwback in the worst sense. Like, it's just a dull, kind of weirdly vengeful, excessive film that, I don't know, it just feels like the type of like macho movie that wears its like manliness on its sleeve and doesn't really have much going for it as far as a story or like what it's trying to say. And I mean, you know, some dads are going to like that, I'm sure, if they stumble upon it. But for me, it left me lacking. It was the type of film that, like, I know if there was nothing that came out this weekend, that probably would have been our main review, and it would have been maybe more of a slog to come up with something more concrete to say about it. But just as another film on Netflix, like we said, there's so much else on streaming right now that's better than this and well worth your time. And certainly a lot more thematically compelling than what's produced here. So I'll just give it a low C. It's not the worst thing out there, But I mean, and it does have some impressive stunt work. I don't want to downplay that, but I think it's just a very lackluster film by and large, and I didn't have fun watching it, and I ultimately found it to be a slog. So skip it.
Worth mentioning, I think that it is a smart business move for Hemsworth, because if it's coming out on Netflix and it's like on the top 10 of Netflix for a while, that's a win for his brand.
It's not
for
a flop.
his PR. Yeah, it can't be a flop technically.
Yeah.
And yeah, even if some people sort of look down on it, it has the Bradley Cooper effect of, well, dads love it. You know, it doesn't matter if critics think it's a white savior film. It can just sort of rise above that on the wave of, you know,
I didn't even
crowd
get into
interest.
that. That's a whole other. Yeah, that's
The
other
main
thing.
I haven't seen the film, but that is the main criticism I've heard from a lot of people, is that it's I think the big one was I think it was Variety called it a white savior version of Man on Fire.
Yeah, I was thinking about Tony Scott. Like if he directed this, I think it could have been something. But yeah, I mean that whole discussion. I'm not the right person for it, but it definitely is. There's one to be had there, and it's not a pleasant or fun conversation. But yeah, that's a major criticism of the film.
Yeah. It's a shame. It's a shame because I do think the stunt work is really great in the Marvel movies. It's clear that Sam Hargrave has been a really big part of that, not just as a stunt man, but a stunt director. And I see the logic. I totally see the logic of like, let's do our own John Wick, but
right. Yeah, exactly.
It's hard. It's hard to replicate that.
Yeah. I mean, I think people forget that like John Wick was a gamble. Like that wasn't like an automatic win, like a movie where like the heart of the film resides on a guy's dog dying is like a huge gamble, and they lucked out. And to their credit, like it's a very well made film and it deserves the success. But yeah, it's not something you can just create magically. But I guess people are going to find that out the hard way.
Yeah.
So there's Extraction.
Yeah. There is an X factor because it has the same elements, you know, of what made John Wick work, which is you have a really good actor. A successful actor, well, at least, and who has a great relationship with the director / somebody they've done stunts with, right? And so you see that same sort of recipe for success, and it's just there's so many things, so many variables that go into a film working. So I say that as somebody again who hasn't seen it. Maybe I would have loved Extraction. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, and not to take it. Yeah, I mean, not to take away from anyone who did like it.
Yeah,
If you enjoy it, fine. But yeah, movies aren't science. Like they're not math. You can't just put X and Y and make Z. It's a lot of factors go into it, and people find that out the hard way. So that's Extraction.
Math is math.
Yeah, math is there. Hey, coach.
All right, let's finish the show out with our last review of the week. And one of the reasons we decided to include this is because it is a TV series, but I think it's going to be the only season. So it's kind of a limited series. And the reason is because it's based on a book. So this is Normal People, which just came out on Hulu, also BBC Three for our friends overseas. This is based on the novel by Sally Rooney. Now, a little backstory here. I actually read this novel kind of in the stereotypical way over last summer by the poolside read.
Okay.
Literally, I was staying with my sister and her kids, and that was a really fun trip. I was out there for about a week, and it was my niece's first week of kindergarten. My other niece was starting second grade. So I was having a blast hanging out with them and taking them into school and stuff. And so like my days consisted of hanging out with them, getting them ready for school, spending some quality time. And then once they were out of the house, I would go out to the pool and I would read this book, Normal People. So that is my background on this story. So I should point out, this is kind of a steamy romance novel, but not in the traditional way. It's not like the kind of romance novel I would recommend to my mom. It's the kind of romance novel I would recommend to my sister, in the sense that she's a little bit older than me, and she's more interested in the more like complicated, complex sort of dramas. Not that this is all that complex. But if you haven't heard of Normal People, it's essentially about two teenagers who sort of have a sexual discovery, and we follow their lives through secondary school, which is high school in Ireland, and their university years. Those characters are Marianne and Connell. Marianne is played by Daisy Edgar Jones. Connell is played by Paul Mescal. I've not seen these actors before. They're both I think Daisy is an English actress, And I'm not 100% sure about Paul Mescal, but I think he's actually Irish. But the show takes place in Ireland, and so it has that kind of flair of like being a different location for a film about this subject matter. You've seen things like this that are about kind of complex will they, won't they relationships and things like that. But the novel, like this show, follows like a significant period of time. And it's 12 episodes. It covers the entire novel, which is why I don't know this for sure. I haven't heard any announcement that they're going to do another series or another season, but it's my understanding that they covered the novel and that's it. That's all we're really getting. And I think that's for the best, because if you read the novel, you'll understand it would kind of be against the point if this series went on. It's kind of why some people sort of look at like the Before trilogy as a fourth one might not be the best idea. I think the third one is really where that story naturally ends. Some people would disagree. And this actually has some common DNA here and there with the Before trilogy, not in terms of quality by any stretch. I think this is the kind of show that's going to be a little bit more of like, I'll say this. The reason I'm not reviewing this, I had an opportunity to review it, is because I think I just love it a little too much. And I don't think I'm a very good reviewer of it, or objectively, because I think it just totally gets to me in a way that makes me turn off my critic brain. I know that's a phrase some people really resent, but that's really the case. Like when I watch this, it's not like when I watch other things where I'm thinking about really deep aspects of storytelling. This is a fantasy escape thing for me, where when I watch it, I'm really just sort of like, my teeth are sunk into this really simple thing that exists, that the stakes are kind of low. And there are some moments where I am sort of thinking, and I'm the lights are flaring and I'm starting to wonder about the way relationships work, and the reasons certain people put up with being mistreated, and all of those sorts of things. But at no point am I watching this being like, man, this is an important thing for everybody to experience. Even though I know a lot of people who really like the book, like I do. I know a lot of people who really look down on the book. So I guess I'm kind of cautious in the way I praise it. But that said, one of the things that is very interesting about this show is that it's half of it is directed by Lenny Abramson. He directs the first 6 episodes, which are phenomenal. And then Hetty McDonald directs episodes 7 through 12, which are also really good, but very different. Like, you really can tell when the story shifts, sometimes for the better, sometimes not quite so. Sally Rooney herself co-writes the first 6 episodes with Alice Birch. I'm not as familiar with Alice Birch, but she does every episode except for episode 11. I guess the reason I've been really looking forward to this is the Lenny Abramson of it all. I don't know where you're at with him as a director, but he's directed some films I really like, including Frank, with Donald Gleason, and another Michael Fassbender back in 2014. But his follow-up, Room, he's in a bunch of movies, but that 1-2 punch is what really put him on a lot of people's radars, because then he came out with Room in 2015, which got a lot of Oscars attention. It introduced Jacob Tremblay. It sort of helped reintroduce Brie Larson to the mainstream, or the reasons she's Captain Marvel, really. And then his follow-up, The Little Stranger, came out in 2018, which I didn't see. I think you saw it eventually, right?
Yeah, no, I saw a screening of it, press screening like a couple weeks before it came out. I don't really remember it too well, but it was all right.
Yeah, I know some people really liked it. It's another Donald Gleason thing, but yeah, it wasn't like, by any stretch near the same acclaim as Room.
Yeah, it got a quiet August release, I remember.
Yeah, it kind of came and went. But there's him. And then there's Hetty McDonald, who I'm not nearly as familiar with. She's probably best known for her work as a director on TV. I think she did an episode of Doctor Who that is really well known, that a lot of people really love. Doctor Who is probably her main thing. She's also done like Howard's End and a lot of BBC UK things. Yeah. But yeah, Normal People is kind of... her sort of stretching her muscles in sort of a folk mentality. This show is really slow. Like, there is a lot of like pauses. There's a lot of like, everything is in the tension between the actors. I think by the end of the first 2 episodes, you'll know if this is for you, because if at that point you can't stand it and you think it's insufferable, it's not going to get better. I think though, if you're kind of with it and you're like, I'm interested in where this goes, keep with it, because it just gets better and better, I think. Although for me personally, I was hooked from the first episode. I've been binging it. It's just a really addicting romance, and it's not a traditional romance, that's for sure, and a lot of it's going to really frustrate people. I think specifically with the way Connell makes certain decisions, and the show pays a lot of really close attention to how anxiety can enter somebody who is more traditionally masculine, and it really does look into this guy who is way more fragile than he wants people to think. And he reminded me a lot, weirdly enough, of Peter Kavinsky from the To the Boys movies, in the way that he's a stereotypical nice guy, where he says the right things, he understands consent and all of that. But this show goes a little bit further with some of the hurdles guys like that face, and really paying attention to what makes them tick. And I thought that was really fascinating. You don't see that kind of masculinity on screen very often. And I think where the show sometimes drops the ball is how it handles Marianne. And I think you can tell the difference between the episodes in that way written by Sally Rooney and the episodes written just by Alice Birch or Mark O'Rowe, because I think when Sally Rooney writes her, she just seems to be in full control of how that character talks and how she presents herself, because it's really difficult and I think the performer, Daisy Edgar-Jones, is killing it, but I think that Sally Rooney just gets what makes that character tick in a way that I'm not sure other people were able to fully succeed in. So I could see that being a shortcoming for a lot of people, especially as like at some point you start to watch this and you're like, what's the point? Like, why, I get it at this point. And that's sort of a reason why I think that it naturally should just end here. I don't think a second season would be nearly as effective. I'm curious what other people might think of that, but that's Normal People. I think that it's really worth checking out at least the novel. I know some people who they don't dig the show. They don't think it really lives up to the book. And I've even read some takes from people who are like, this actually made me appreciate the book more. Like people who are frustrated with the book are sort of like, yeah, actually, judging by this, I think the book was way better. I think they're both good. I think this is one of the few adaptations where I thought this mostly nailed it. I think that there's some new stuff added in to help round out the characters. And I think the casting is perfect. I just really thought like, yeah, that's kind of how I pictured Connell. Maybe not exactly what he looks like, right? And I definitely didn't picture Marianne that way, and I didn't picture Peggy or any of these characters like this. But aside from the aesthetic, just the way they present themselves and the dynamic and the sexual tension and the chemistry, all of that was nines. I just thought that it really flowed into a really smart way to adapt this novel without making it feel like it overstays its welcome. Just my opinion. I think other people might disagree, but that's Normal People. It's on Hulu now. Will, I don't know if you would really be into it, honestly. Okay. I don't think I'm aware of like anything you've liked that is similar to this. So I'd be cautious. Maybe watch the trailer and see what you think.
Yeah. I mean, I love the Before movies, so if it's anything like that, then definitely, I mean, that's up my alley.
What do you know them, the performers? Where do you know them from?
What? No, I said the Before movies.
Oh.
Before Sunrise, Sunset.
It's superficially like those. It's definitely not the same kind of thing. Like the way the characters talk to each other is very different. It doesn't have that same incredible dialogue. I was just thinking more of like the way it categorizes their lives and like revisits them, and that's what it has in common. So I should clarify. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well,
in that case,
I guess. Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's like Before, anything it's like the Before movies, my ears perk. I'm like, oh. What could this be? But yeah, if it's not like that, maybe I might not check it out. But I don't know. I'm curious.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something I'd push away. But yeah, I can't say for certain if it's my thing or not.
At the very least, people should check out the soundtrack. It's on Spotify. It is fantastic. I love it. I've been listening to it constantly. It's kind of this weird blend of like folky indie music and like more pop songs, because that's what pops up in this movie. And it's all really good. Me? Yeah, I was like, man, this is like a really well curated playlist of music just on its own. So yeah, you can find it on Spotify just under like Normal People, and that's definitely worth checking out if you're not going to watch the show.
I was gonna say, you think it would come up though if you just type in Normal People?
I think so. I don't know. You'll tell though, because the playlist shows like a screenshot of the show, like you see the two actors, so you'll know it's that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you'll think if you type in Normal People, it's just gonna be like, who is this basic somebody or another?
Making fun of his friends.
Yeah.
All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Cinemaholics. Next week, We have a couple things we're thinking about checking out. Again, Devs is another thing we were like, we kind of want to see. I still haven't watched it. There's also the BC Boys documentaries we mentioned. There's a new Ryan Murphy series which is about to come out called Hollywood. We might get into that.
Hollywood.
Yeah. What else?
The half of it. What was it? The thing we were talking about before. Something.
All Day and Night.
All Night and a Day, I think it's called. All Day and a Night. Sorry, I mixed it up. Which is from the co-writer of Black Panther, and it stars Jeffrey Wright. So I think that one could be intriguing. I mean, just in terms of like having good talent involved, I don't know if that'll be a Netflix like top 10er, but I'm curious about that one. So there's a couple things, and obviously the BC Boys doc is going to be one we're going to talk about, and then hopefully To the Stars. So there's some stuff we can talk about.
Yeah. If you have any specific recommendations, be sure to hit up the comments section on cinemaholics.com. We'll see you on our social pages as well, our Facebook and Twitter, which you can find in the show notes. And with that, we're going to say later. We got a big game to go to, and we're going to do our best to score as much as possible.
Yeah, good luck, Coach.
Thanks. You're going to need it.
You're going to do it. Yeah.
All right. Well, from the Internet California / Minnesota State, I'm John Iglo.
And for the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Welsh.
See you next time.